welcome to another exciting episode of The Energy That Surrounds Us. I am Michael, your host, and you'll notice that Carla is missing because, unfortunately, due to weather, in her area where she lives, there was a huge storm that knocked out her internet. And so hopefully that'll get restored soon. And if it's possible, she'll come in when she can. If not, we hope you have a nice, relaxing evening. And we will move on with our guest, Mr. Preston Dennett, who is an author of 30 books and has been published in many magazines. So welcome to the show, Preston.
Hey, thanks, Michael. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
I'm excited. And so you are from the topic field of UFOs, correct?
Yes. I will say that is absolutely true, though not something I ever thought I would be. I came into this field as a complete skeptic, honestly. I did not believe that people were seeing ET craft or UFOs, or I didn't believe in anything paranormal, Michael. Nothing. I believed that we were alone in the universe, and when we die, that's the end. There's no such thing as ghosts. There's no such thing as Bigfoot. None of that. And yeah, I was wrong. I'll admit it. I found out the hard way. I'll never forget it. It was 1986, and there was a report on the news about a sighting over Alaska. And it's very well known in the UFO community about a Japanese commercial airliner, which sighted two very large walnut-shaped craft, larger than the Japanese commercial jet they were flying over Alaska. And it was seen on radar. It tracked their jet for many miles. Actually, they requested a course change, I later found out, to try to shake these objects, and which was granted. Still, these objects followed them. Now, mind you, this was a probably 2-minute news report, if that, maybe 1 minute. And I'll never forget it. The newscaster just kind of joked and laughed about it, pointed to each other like, "You ever seen a UFO?" "No, I haven't. Have you?" And that was it. But it interested me enough to sort of think about it. And I remembered that my brother Mark, my older brother, I have 3 older brothers, had said he'd seen a UFO. That was years earlier, and I did not believe him at the time. I was just, a teenager. And when I heard this news report, this was 1986, I was 21 years old, still pretty young. So I went up to Mark and I asked him about it. And he's like, "Oh, you're ready to listen, huh?" I'm like, "Yeah, tell me what you think you saw." And he described an amazing sighting. I mean, it knocked me over. A metallic disc, colored lights around it, a dome on top, treetop level. He chased it with his two friends. All three of them actually chased it down Reseda Boulevard, which is in Southern California, right outside of LA. And yeah, I mean, I just couldn't believe it. I absolutely could not believe it.
And I gotta say, Preston, looking at you, I cannot believe you got 30 books under your belt, let alone magazine articles or newspaper articles. It's like, wow. How do you find the time?
Yeah, well, it's a passion. I think that helps. If you really enjoy doing something, I could not, I kind of always knew this was going to be my path, writing, something I've always wanted to do. But it just kind of came over me. I couldn't help myself. People needed to know. And I will say I was in this field of UFO research for 10 years before I put out my first book. I started investigating in 1986 and became a field investigator for MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, probably a year or 2 in, and started attending conventions. Of course, I bought every book I could find. Back then, there wasn't a lot. Now there's a lot more, as you can see from the bookcases behind me. But yeah, after writing about 30 articles or so, I thought, you know what? Here's another article I want to write. So I just interviewed this lady, I'll call her Wendy, who was having major encounters. And she says, they actually healed me. I'm like, what do you mean healed you? She says, well, I had this cyst. I was diagnosed with a cyst in my fallopian tube. And she was going to have surgery for it. She had an MRI, the whole deal, causing a lot of problems for her. And she says the night before she was scheduled to have surgery, she had a visitation in her room by gray ETs. She doesn't really remember a whole lot other than that they came. And she woke up the next morning thinking, well, this is significant. They came right before the day of surgery. So she went to have surgery, and they did pre-op imaging, as they always do, and they couldn't find her cyst. And the doctors got real upset about it, actually. And one of the guys came in and said, what's going on? Did you have surgery? She's like, well, no. And I said, well, you're lying. We know you did, because your cyst is gone. And they said, there's indications here of surgery, and pointed them out to her. She just played dumb. I'm like, why didn't you just tell them? She said, are you kidding? They would put me in a mental institution, which I have to say, I've talked to people who've had that happen. I can now I understand. But when she told me that, I thought, gosh, there's another case I know of a Peruvian customs official who went on his veranda, saw this saucer, was pretty high up there, and it sent down this beam of light which struck him on the chest and face. And he says it cured him of two conditions: nearsightedness, of all things, and rheumatism, chronic rheumatism. This was a case from Ralph and Judy Bloom, who wrote a really good book, Beyond UFOs, or
right.
I think that's what it's called, Beyond Earth, actually. But I'm like, well, that's interesting, because I knew of another case where two police officers were driving through Damon, Texas, and one of them had his hand hanging outside the cruiser when this UFO showed up, and it struck them with a beam of light. And he said he could actually feel it. It was on his hand. It felt warm and tingly, he said. And they drove off frightened out of their minds, reaching very high speeds, and pulled off in a diner. Well, previously, that officer, I think his name was Deputy Good, and he was with Officer McCoy. He had been bitten on his finger by a baby pet alligator, which which caused a wound, which was all swollen and painful and all bandaged up. But it wasn't hurting when he walked into this diner after being struck by this beam of light. His pain was not there, so he pulled off the bandage, and he said it couldn't even tell I'd been bit. This was confirmed by his fellow officer, who is the superior, who basically is the boss of over 50 officers. So these are good witnesses.
Right.
That case became real famous.
Yeah. I gotta say, I love hearing that, because everyone always talks about, oh, they took me and they did this or they did that to me, and now I have this or that. And so it's really exciting to hear the other side of it that people don't normally hear about, and I feel are probably more common than the other. But we live in the society of, if somebody's not hurt, it's not news. And so everybody wants to focus on the other part of the UFO abductions and everything. And so thank you for sharing that, because that really, I get tingles just hearing that story of, how they were healing people and thinking that's the aliens that I'm expecting to come.
Yeah, well, that's the aliens you should expect to come, because that is what they're doing. And not to say that people don't have frightening encounters.
Right.
I certainly looked into so-called injury cases, and there are a few out there, no doubt. I looked into them. But when I started hearing about these healing cases, because I kind of bought into that narrative too, like, oh, this is scary. What is happening?
Right.
People are being taken on board, and they are being physically examined. And that can be very scary. but I don't have accounts of torture or people being intentionally hurt or anything like that really at all.
Yeah, I think that's all the Hollywood drama sale.
Yeah, it's like you said, if it doesn't hurt, it's not news. So I started looking, I started stepping back a little bit and taking a more objective look at things and really looking at all of the onboard cases that were in the literature at the time, and certainly my own. I thought this would make a great article because, there was another guy in France, investigated by Jacques Vallée and Amy Michel, who was healed of an axe wound on his foot. I mean, there were a number of cases. A little girl healed of stomach cancer, and several others that I knew of. I thought, well, if I could find 5 or 10 cases, I've got my own here, I could probably write a pretty good article about this. And Michael, I found about 30 cases just, in the first week or two of research, because I had a lot of books by that point. I thought, you know what? I bet I could find more. So I started contacting researchers. I found more cancer cures. I found a lady cured of lupus. I found all kinds of healings. And after a year of research, I found over 100 cases. And that became my first book. So that's kind of how I entered the field. And that book really kind of put me on the map, I think. And it actually got me on TV. I couldn't believe it.
Oh, yeah, I'm impressed too, because normally TV shows aren't interested in the nice side of things.
Yeah, it got me on the show. I think it was called Sightings at the time, if I remember correctly. Yeah, I think it was Sightings. It's long ago, been canceled, but yeah, I brought her on, Wendy, and there was another councilwoman in Florida, Lynn Plaskett, who had just come out because she had been healed of Hodgkin's disease, I think it was, cancer.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and there were other cases. So that's how I kind of really started writing books. And since that book did go out of print eventually, but every single time, almost without exception, that I spoke before an audience or went on the radio or talked about that book in any way, someone would come up to me. I remember each one because I'd write it down. I'd be like, "Can I interview you?" One guy was healed of an infected tattoo, he said. Another guy, or lady actually, she said the doctors expected her to go deaf. She had some real ear problems. She says the ETs cured her. Another lady, this is the first time I actually spoke on this subject publicly, was at a convention in Palm Springs. And this lady says, "Can I please tell you my story? I'm so glad you're talking about this because no one is." She said that she was in her bathroom and decided to clean the bathroom and did what, a lot of people learn the hard way that you don't do, which is mix cleaning fluids.
Oh, yeah.
Mixed, I think, lime away with bleach and some other cleanser, and it created this noxious gas. And she fainted dead away and found herself on board a craft being cured. She said it was really weird because they used lights and sound to cure her, which is something I've heard before. It's often lights. They'll use some sort of lights, usually to cure somebody.
Right, because isn't it like red light has a healing frequency to it, or the not ultraviolet, the purple light, is it? But I know certain colors have healing vibrations or frequencies with them, if I'm not mistaken.
I think there might be something to that. I would like to see more research on it. I know Major George Filer, who's a superstar in this field, had healing cases of his own and said that he used blue light on himself and was able to stop colds in their tracks. I wish there was more research on that because the ETs can do amazing things with the electromagnetic spectrum. We're only beginning to understand. I mean, we do healings with light ourselves. They discovered that jaundice in babies, one of the best treatments is just putting them in sunlight. and they can cure detached retina, for example, with lasers. We're learning how to do healing with light. They can heal fractured bones by sending electrical impulses into them and speed up the healing process. So I think to some extent that's what ETs are doing. But the things they can do with light, oh man, they can levitate you. They can pull you through solid objects like walls. They can heal. People have been burned by, there's a few cases. Most of the injury cases I found were people who had gotten too close to landed UFOs or UFOs hovering overhead. But they absolutely can do things with light that we're only beginning to understand.
Right.
Render people unable to move, temporarily paralyzed. A lot of cases of that.
I think I've even read to where in some cases they would put like somebody had an amputated arm and they put the arm in a water solution and light on it, and next thing they know they had a limp. So I'm not sure if that's true or not, but from what you're saying, it sounds like it's very plausible.
Yeah, well, I put out another book on the healing cases because I kept getting so many. That's one of my more recent books, The Healing Power of UFOs, which documents about 300 cases. And it covers the spectrum of illnesses, conditions, and diseases. Everything from minor backaches to chronic backaches to stomach aches to flesh wounds of all kinds, broken bones, certainly. But kidney stones, liver disease, heart disease, diabetes, diphtheria. Oh gosh, I mean, hepatitis, ulcers, so many cancer, many cases of tumors. It's two cases of AIDS I found. I never did find anyone who was missing a limb and got it replaced, though reportedly the very controversial Billy Meyer case, they told him, because he has one arm, they told him we could replace your arm, and he said, no, I don't, that would raise too many questions. There was one case where a guy was in a war. I don't remember the exact date or location, but this was not in the United States, certainly. It's in Europe, I believe. And he had stepped on a landmine or something along those lines and had his leg pretty much pulverized. And he was pulled on board. And they told him, we can't save your leg, but we can save your life, because he was going to die. He ended up losing his limb. He asked them, why can't you? They said, our technology is not advanced to that degree. The damage is too severe. So he did lose his limb, but he survived, and it was all healed up when they found him on the battlefield. Caused a big to-do because there was no way that he could have survived what he survived.
Right.
Yeah, there's so many healing cases. It's amazing.
Right. I'm going to take a moment, and because our chat room is blowing up, you have some fans in the chat room. Foggy Notions podcast says he always enjoys your presentations, and he says your YouTube is epic in all caps.
Nice. Thanks, Foggy Notions.
So you have a lot of fans in here, and a lot of the people I'm noticing are saying comments like there's such a rich history, multiple records of healing. It's just, I guess they're trying to say it's mind-blowing, or I'm not sure what the emoticon is, but people are sharing that you're being on here, and people are saying thank you for telling me about this. And Akhenaten Solar 1974 says it's a psyop, all the scary movies about aliens. I've heard that too, and I'm sure you come across that, or have you, the documents of the CIA wanting to make us afraid of our alien brethren?
Yeah, I think there's absolutely something to that. As you were saying earlier, fear sells. Our media is very fear-based. I mean, you really can't even watch the news. It's so incredibly negative. But there is absolutely a concerted effort using our tax dollars to create a ET threat narrative. And we see that all the time. We're seeing that right now with governments talking about ETs and the so-called security threat and how this is dangerous to our pilots. I'm like, well, hold on a second. UFOs have been flying, well, for millennia, let's face it. But since the modern age of UFOs in 1947, the number of pilot encounters is off the charts. There's case after case after case of them approaching planes.
Right.
I looked into it. How many of actual collisions have there been? I wrote about this in my Not From Here books. There's a few, but there's, given the huge number of encounters, they are absolutely not here as to hurt us. I just don't find the evidence at all persuasive of that.
Right. And Linda Judd, she's a fan of our show. She makes a comment. Solfeggio is the name of musical frequency that coordinate with color frequencies. So I'm going to kind of turn that into a question of, do you feel the Solfeggio scale with its harmonics and everything they're finding from it, do you think that was a gift from the ETs, or was that something we just stumbled on and found and just because we were in tune with nature?
Yeah, I think it's nature. I think it's, how would I put it, an example of the laws of the universe. Music is very mathematical. The universe itself follows certain laws, and we can see that with the Fibonacci sequence and how that relates to a lot of what we do see in nature. The macro world and the micro world mirror each other when you're talking about atomic structure or cosmic structure, planets and solar systems. You can see this with neurons in your brains and trees growing and all different kinds of amazing symmetries. In fact, that's the title of one of my books. It's called Symmetry, A True UFO Adventure, which is about Dolly Safran. She's a contactee. And she's an amazing person, a lifelong history of fully conscious contact. No fear, no hypnosis. It's one of the most extensive cases of contact I've ever researched, really even read about. And as I'm interviewing her and putting her book together, documenting her experiences, I asked her, I'm thinking of calling the book Dolly Among the Stars. What do you think of that title? And she's like, well, I like it, but I was really hoping that we could call it Symmetry. I'm like, oh, okay. Why? Why would you want to call it Symmetry? And she says, well, this is what the ETs taught me. This is one of the main lessons. This is what she observed working and living with the ETs, that there's a symmetry throughout the universe, that life here on Earth mirrors what she's seen and been taught about on other planets. We go in depth into this concept in the book. But yeah, wow. I think that this does all, music and light. There was a really interesting experiment that was done with music where you play music on speakers and you put little, I think it was metallic shavings or sand or something on top of the speakers, and it creates this really cool pattern. It's like, wow, this is from sound waves, from music. And I think the ETs, do use sound to heal because they know all about harmonics. And I wonder, when studying the healing cases, I was looking into the colors of these beams of light that heal people. And there was an awful lot of blue beams of light and white beams, and very few of some other colors like orange or what have you. So I think there is something to color and certainly music and sound and vibration and all of this.
Wow. Well, we happen to have a Dolly Safran in our chat room, and she agrees with you. It's a universal constant. And Michael Kennedy has a question for you. Well, actually, it says he's asking for a friend. What insights can you share about crystals, the ETs, interest in them, and perhaps their involvement in the paranormal phenomenon?
Oh gosh, I wish I had more solid information on this, but it is something I've seen. I mean, there was a lady that I interviewed who had full on contact up in Topanga Canyon. And she had an ET appear right in front of her and was sharing all kinds of information and said she had the ability to heal. And it's quite a complicated case, but she became absolutely obsessed with crystals after that. And that kind of intrigued me because I'd certainly met and talked to a lot of contactees. There's another guy, I'll call him Phil. That's not his real name. He's a car mechanic. And I went over to his house to interview him because he had a lifelong contact. He was part of a very big case I was investigating called the Coronado Island UFO incident. It's a multi-witness case which occurred on Coronado Island back in 1994 in March. And he was one of the witnesses. Really interesting guy. But I went over to his house. And he took me to this back room, which was filled with crystals. He's absolutely obsessed with crystals. I don't know that I have any real information on how ETs use crystals. I do know that Billy Meyer gave a sample of metal to Marcel Vogel, who was the inventor of the quartz crystal, I think, for watches, or worked on that. And he investigated some of these metal samples and said that there was crystal integrated into the metal sample that was in a way that we couldn't do it with our current level of technology. There's some connection there. I don't think UFOs are powered by dilithium crystals like in Star Trek. But Star Trek did get a lot of stuff right, so I kind of wonder about that for sure.
Right. I mean, it makes sense if you think about crystalline energy because the harmonics, powering stuff up. But yeah, if it runs on dilithium, that I'm not sure if that's the energy source, but
No. Yeah.
so I want to kind of shift gears a second to something we were talking about backstage because this is a topic that I think doesn't get discussed a lot, but I kind of have a feeling is tied with the UFOs, and that's the Nazca lines.
Right. Yeah, the Nazca lines in Peru, which are ancient. I mean, these date back thousands of years. I'm not an expert on the Nazca lines by any means. I've certainly read about them in the Time Life books and other cases, and there's been a lot of reality TV shows which go down there and like, look, the Nazca lines. These are a phenomena that we see all over the world, really. Similar cases of these huge sort of, well, I wouldn't call them petroglyphs, but there's a name for them. It's escaping me. But very interesting. They show these enormously large figures, animals mostly, which really can only be seen from above.
Right.
And I think the scientific consensus on these is that they are created by people, the indigenous cultures, in an attempt to communicate with the ETs that were probably visiting them at that time. So it's pretty interesting to say the least, because I think, certainly in the petroglyphs, because there's all kinds of evidence of ancient aliens, hieroglyphs, right, petroglyphs, cave paintings, ancient writings in multiple cultures. Some of them do depict what we would probably call grays and flying saucers, flat right out. There's no mistaking it. So I think the Nazca lines represent evidence of that. But yeah, again, I'm not really an expert on the Nazca lines, so it's hard for me to speak too much to that.
Right, because like we were discussing, like the one of where the man looks like a astronaut, or like the spider or dragonfly, which aren't common to that area. So it's like, how did they know to such degree what they looked like? And how could they make them standing on the ground to where when you see them from above, oh my God, you actually can see something. But to be able to walk the ground and be like, yeah, we got to go here. And then there's no footprint. So it's like, how did they put these lines down?
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating when you look back into all the history on this subject, because you'll find more and more. It's funny, the show Ancient Aliens started out with just one guy going out there with a videotape, visiting these monuments and trying to figure out, who made them and what did they mean. And of course, it turned into a super big hit show. And
Right.
we're still trying to figure out a lot about, the pyramids is just one example, but, you know, so many monuments all across the world that really have some very interesting features that point towards, us being visited for millennia, which again, I think is more evidence that we don't have to worry about these guys too much. They're not here
No.
to take over. They've been around forever. It's the height of arrogance to think that they're really wanting to take our resources or take over our planet or influence us in any negative way. Remember, these are very advanced beings. This is something
Right.
I think almost all researchers will agree upon. They may argue about, their agenda and so forth, who they are and where they come from, but there's no doubt that these are craft, because they've got portholes. When they land on the ground, they can glassify the sand. We know that they reach temperatures that are in excess of 1,000 degrees to be able to burn the ground itself to the point where it turns to glass. We know that they are solid objects. They appear on radar. So we know that these are craft. I mean, for Pete's sake, they have portholes.
Right.
They're flying circles, literal circles around our most advanced aircraft. There's a very famous case in Nevada where we had just reached the highest altitude we could possibly reach. The pilot was Major White, and they were doing a high altitude test with the fastest, highest plane that we had in existence. And he's like, guys, I've got friends up here. And he filmed them. And this film has never been released. It's classified. But this case did leak out. And he saw, I believe it was 5 or 6 craft, which he described as white and saucer shaped, which were above his plane. It was a clear case, I think, of the ET's mission, if you will, to publicize or announce their presence. This is something they've been doing. People talk about disclosure, disclosure, disclosure. Why don't the ETs show themselves? Well, they have. And they have been from the beginning, over and over and over again. How much evidence do we need before this is accepted in the mainstream?
Right.
Not for the government cover-up. This would have been accepted long ago. The highest levels of government, 100% know this is a real phenomenon. This is so easily demonstrable through documents released from the Freedom of Information Act and declassified documents. I mean, here's just one example I'll give you, which shocked me. I was doing research for a book, UFOs at the Drive-In. This was going to be just, another article or a chapter, but it ended up being a whole book because I ran into this case where UFOs were hovering over a drive-in theater. I thought, wow, that's crazy. I mean, when I say hovering over, right over the screen or right next to it. I started getting more and more cases. So I took a deep dive and I found over 100 all across the US, some in Canada, and a few scattered ones outside of North America, but mostly a US phenomena. And I found this case. This is the one that I couldn't believe it. At the Terrace Drive-In in Bakersfield, California, 1952. There was about 300 people at this drive-in theater, and this cylindrical object drops down out of the sky, covers right over the screen, like they usually do, right above it, maybe 20 to 50 feet, almost the entire length of the screen itself. And it flashed its lights at the audience. And then it took off real fast, like a bullet. So there's, a few hundred people watching this. and one of them happened to be a military officer. Otherwise, I don't think this would have ever seen the light of day in terms of being published in any way. But he called the local sheriff's office, Sheriff Leroy Hatfield. And Sheriff Leroy Hatfield took the report, hung up the phone, and got another call from someone who had been at that theater. And he took that report and hung up the phone, got another call. He received 4 calls in a row. And he said, hang up. I'm just going to go over to the theater. Go over there. I'll meet you. Because this was, well before cell phones.
Right.
And he went there, and there were still over 100 people there talking about it. He took the reports of 30 people, and they described pretty much the same thing. There were slight variations in their testimony, and he had people lined up in a literal line wanting to talk to him. He said, no, that's enough. I've talked to enough of you. I'm going to write up a report, and I'm going to send it to the local Air Force Base, which happened to be Edwards, Bakersfield being very close to Edwards Air Force Base. Then I think it was Muroc, but at any rate, Edwards Air Force Base. So he writes up the report and sends it to the precursor of Project Blue Book, which was just forming. And an officer took his report, and I found this online. You can find this. He marked it action in big letters, stamped at the top, wrote up the whole report, and sent it. Get this. This is what shocked me. To the commanding general at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, to the director of intelligence at Washington, D.C., and to the commander of Ent Air Force Base in Colorado. What's significant about this is, Ent Air Force Base, that's where they're tracking incoming and outgoing traffic. Wright-Patterson is UFO Central. If you know anything about UFOs, that's where the crash retrieval debris is usually shipped and studied. This is where we study all foreign aircraft, Russian, Chinese, and extraterrestrial. And of course, Washington, D.C., which is the head of government. So this is a good example of how they knew from the beginning what this was. And despite their denials and telling people that if you think you saw a UFO, it's either a hoax, a hallucination, or a misperception. There's nothing to this. You are crazy. There's no national security threat. There's absolutely nothing to this. That was a lie. And it's demonstrably provable. And I've got other cases of drive-in theaters where the same exact thing happened. And this is 1952, 1951, 1954. And it goes on and on and on and on. They knew from the beginning what this was before this. I mean, I'm sure you've heard of the Roswell crash.
Oh, yeah.
They
All three of them.
Right? They knew. I mean, there was a case in Cape Girardeau, Missouri in 1940. It was 1940. There was the Battle of L.A. Apparently, there was a crash retrieval there.
Really? I never heard about the crash retrieval, but I heard they opened fire on something, but I never heard they hit anything and got anything out of it.
Well, I don't know if they actually shot one down or if one crashed or what have you, but according to researchers, Bob Wood, who is basically the crash retrieval guy, he found documentation pointing towards this. It rests on just a little bit of evidence. I don't know that they even have any firsthand testimony. That's what's so frustrating about these crash retrieval incidents, is a lot of them are purely anecdotal. I mean, they really are. There's enough of them to say for sure these are going on. And for example, Roswell, there's hundreds of witnesses. I love the Roswell case. I know people think, you're beating a dead horse. I'm like, hold on a second. This is an important case. The Air Force has made very ridiculous denials about it that don't hold water. And researchers have interviewed everybody who was in any way involved in that case, whether they saw the thing come down or tracked it on radar or guarded the wreckage or were there at the scene. It's amazing. People who flew the wreckage, people who studied the wreckage. It's an amazing case. There's over 50 books on that case. I just saw a new one published the other day. I'm like, oh, here's another Roswell book.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was interesting because when I went to Roswell with a friend, we were kind of noticing how the town is starting to play it down and more than you would expect. And it's like, this is your claim to fame. And we said to somebody, well, where's the crash site? And he goes, which one? And we go, what are you talking about? And that's when I learned that there was actually 3 UFO crashes in Roswell. And I'm like, I only heard of 1. How did we never hear about 2 and 3?
Yeah, there's far more UFO crash retrieval incidents than people realize. I mean, they really have no idea. When I wrote UFOs over California, there was a number of incidents involving this sort of thing. Nevada, Colorado, Arizona, New York. These are all books I've written where I basically dug deep into the history of these states. And they all had incidents. So this is far more common than people realize.
Right. And I know I'm watching the chat group. They're wanting me to go a certain route, but I'm going to ask you something that we were kind of talking about backstage, and that is the UFOs. We have, through the secret space program, certain craft that look like UFOs that are, for all intent and purposes, are UFOs. How often do you feel that the reports that come in that people see are those crafts versus the crafts like you're saying that we're seeing above the stratosphere in outer space coming down and hovering around?
Yeah, well, it's a little bit of a trick question because the answer changes as time goes on. When I got involved in this field, I heard from people who were highly placed in the military or the military industrial complex in a position to know. And they told me that more than you think are our own. I'm like, what do you mean more than I think? How many? And they said, well, it's close to 20%, at least. This was back in the 80s. And particularly they said over military bases like Area 51 or Edwards or what have you. And as time goes on, I think that increased dramatically. And especially when we started to get reports of, these flying triangles, TR-3Bs, our own. This is well known within the UFO community, certainly. And there's been a lot of buzz about triangular-shaped craft. And talking to Dolly Safran, she really opened my eyes on this because she says, listen, the ETs have bugged out just the past couple of years. And by that, I mean our magnetic fields on this planet have become dramatically unstable due to the coronal mass ejections of our sun. So the things people are seeing today, this year, last year, are probably our own. Not to say that there's not some ET drones here and there, some, but when some people are describing triangular craft, she's like, go through your files. I challenge you to do this. Tell me, because that's our government. And so I did. And I really found almost no cases of my own personally involving people who've been taken on board triangular craft. The genuine UFOs generally come in a number of different shapes. They could be egg-shaped, spherical, most often saucer-shaped or crescent-shaped, V-shaped, sort of like a boomerang type shape. But I didn't have any triangular-shaped craft reports of people who've been taken on board. Because when a person's taken on board, well, then if they're seeing ETs, that's ET.
Right.
So, yeah, I think a lot of what people are seeing today are probably our own. There's no doubt we've reverse engineered this technology to a certain degree. So I don't think we've gotten to the point where we can, do what the ETs can do. But yeah, we've got anti-grav. We've got craft that can absolutely mimic UFOs. My advice to people would be, if you see a triangular craft, it's probably our own. If you see a rectangular one, run. Because there's this is the buzz in the UFO community. I can't prove this, but this is what I'm hearing. That there is going to be a false flag at some point where our government stages a fake ET invasion. And it's not going to be good. I'm worried about it.
I think they call it Project Bluebeam, which is ironic because blue being such a healing color and frequency. It's like, why are they wanting us now to become afraid of the blue?
Yeah, well, it's a clever disinformation ploy. These guys are, well, I was going to say not stupid. I think they are stupid because they're lying, they're covering up, and that's not smart. It just isn't.
No.
It's immoral, and it's bad karma. It's a bad decision all around. But they're, let me put it this way, clever in their disinformation ploys. I would point to something like the alien autopsy footage,
Right.
which was clearly a lot of money spent on that. But anyone who's involved in the film industry can point out the flaws in it. The problem is, in its essence, that has happened. I mean, that's basically true in its details. And here they are presenting something that's clearly false and has been debunked. I don't think that that's the consensus, certainly in the UFO community, that this was fake. But that happened. That actually happened. They have autopsied ETs. There is crashed UFOs. And this is how these disinformation folks do it. They put something that is absolutely false, but true in its particulars. In that way, well, anyone who says that they have footage of this, it's faked, like the alien autopsy. We're dealing with a really difficult situation here. And,
right.
I don't know if you've done any research or even heard of MyLab's military abductions, but this is, another real complication to this whole phenomena of ET contact and UFO research. Because people are reporting really negative experiences, and they're not with ETs. The most negative thing I hear, and having interviewed hundreds and hundreds of people, the most negative thing I hear from people is that when they start having contact, it scares the pants off of them to the point where they are screaming in terror. And some people have soiled their pants. They have nightmares, PTSD, can't sleep unless the lights are on and the doors are triple locked and so forth. And I always ask them, well, what happened to you? That was so bad. And they describe, well, I felt a complete loss of control as I was pulled on board a craft and physically examined. I wasn't able to move. And I was okay. What happened next? And people will usually describe, well, that's pretty much all I can remember. I've seen instruments coming at me and these guys around me, and they were saying, don't be afraid, we won't hurt you. And I'm screaming at them the whole time and fighting. And some people, and generally, they will have this experience repeatedly. At some point, they get over their fear. And some people just don't have the fear. They don't. The ETs say, don't be afraid, and they're not. And this is when you start to really understand what's happening when someone is taken on board. Because this is not uncommon. When I first started doing research into this subject, I found some people who are having these experiences in my family, friends, and coworkers, onboard experiences. And reading the books that I could get my hands on, I found a quote from J. Allen Hynek, who is, of course, the astronomical consultant for Project Blue Book. And he said 140 people have been taken on board a craft. I lost my mind when I read that. I'm like, no way. I know someone would be taken on board. Because I know 50 people, or 40. And sure enough, yeah, I found people who had this experience, and later, in 1991, the Roper organization found 1 in 50 people. They're a polling organization. They found 1 in 50 people have had an onboard experience. So my point is, this is not uncommon. This was truly nefarious. We would know it by now. These people are being taken on board, and yeah, it's scary, but they're being healed. And then they're being given a tour of the craft. And I mean, it goes on from there. It follows a pretty set structure, what happens when people are taken on board.
I kind of wonder if that's part of why, like, they hired Hollywood to do all the scary alien movies, and why we're building our own, like, quote, ET looking craft is so that when they do come, we don't think of them as friend, we think of them as foe and stay under their control rather than having our friends come in and say, we're here to help. We're here to liberate. And we're of the mindset, you're here to attack us.
Yeah, well, you've hit the nail right on the head, I think. That's absolutely it. That's the driving force behind the cover up, control. Because we are dealing with governments or secret governments, the 1%ers, the cabal, there's all kinds of names for it, military industrial complex, who have all the wealth on this planet, almost all of it. 99% of the wealth this is well known, is owned by a very small minority, 1%. So this is what the situation is. This is the driving force behind the cover up. It's greed, it's power, it's money, it's control.
Right.
It's unfortunate.
Right. Well, we got about 5 minutes left of the hour. We can go longer if you want, because I'm sure there's still some topics out there to talk about, or if you need to go, we can start to wrap it up.
I can go longer. I can go a half hour longer.
Okay.
I have to hang up at that point.
Okay. Well, one thing I know was being asked in the chat group, I am watching it as well, is something we were talking about, the crop circles. What is your view of the aliens with the UFOs leaving crop circles behind? Are they messages or warnings or both?
Well, I am not a crop circle researcher. I've met some crop circle researchers and talked to them. Colin Andrews, Barbara Lamb. She did a lot of research, and I've looked into them. I will say one thing right off the bat. Yeah, they are absolutely not random. They're very much meaningful. They're extraordinarily beautiful. They're not made by humans. The vast majority aren't. There was a big publicity, what would you call it, a to-do, I guess, about Doug and Dave, these two guys from England who said, oh, guess what? We're the ones who are creating these crop circles. Well, no, we're not.
Out there with their board flattening the corn or something.
Yeah, I mean, you can make a crop circle pretty easily. Just nail in a little post with a rope and flatten out, and you can get a perfect circle. But some of these are extraordinarily complex. And when they started being reported in large numbers all over the world, this is not confined to like England, where there are quite a few of them. That's Crop Circle Central. But yeah, they're across the US, Canada, Australia. I mean, they're everywhere. And they have amazing mathematical intricacies to them. There are some people who claim to have decoded them, but some are clearly, obviously, do have messages in them. You can look into this in the crop circle literature. It's amazing. But what I love about them is scientists did look into them. And I would point to Dr. Levengood, who became a leading crop circle researcher. And he would take stalks from these crops that were being laid down by some mysterious force and put them under electron microscopes. And he could tell instantly the genuine ones from the fake ones. And you can tell just by looking at them, because the genuine ones have the crops, they're interwoven and the stalks aren't broken. and they're incredibly precise. And they're usually done very quickly, overnight or in a matter of hours. I mean, there's been people who are staking out areas and did not see them being made, and they were there.
Right.
They're absolutely genuine. And he found that under an electron microscope, the actual cell walls of the nodes in these vegetation were exposed to some type of radiation. So they're being physically affected in a way that we don't have the capacity to do. Certainly not with publicly released technology. And we're not seeing helicopters over these areas. Some of these areas are roped off. Some of these are private fields where people are not able to get into. They're absolutely 100% genuine. I think they are meaningful. And there's some that are clearly, I mean, there's one with the ET head and a record, which I think references the Voyager.
Right.
And one has a Fibonacci sequence. You can see it in detail. There's all kinds of ones that are pretty easily discernible in terms of what it's trying to say.
And one of my favorites is the Milky Way, our galaxy, and it shows 9 planets, and then we were like, I think at the time going, oh wait, no, there's only 8. Pluto's not really a planet. It's like, there's 9 in this crop circle. We have 9.
Yeah, the crop circles are fascinating, and people have reported weird paranormal events inside them. I don't know how much credence to give some of these reports, but yeah, I think there might be something to that as well.
Yeah. Ashley Hale is actually asking a question on something you mentioned back in the intro of when you introduced yourself. Do you feel there's any correlation between Bigfoot sightings and alien encounters?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I really do. I did look into this because I got my own case involving a radiologist in Canyon Country. This is on the outskirts of Los Angeles and right along the edge of the LA National Forest, which I later found out did have a history of Bigfoot encounters. But he described his UFO landing in his backyard, which is nothing there. It's just forest. It's the edge of the LA forest, which is vast, by the way. I think it's like 250,000 acres or something. And he said that this was just blue and white lights. He couldn't really tell what it was, but it landed and it took off, or it appeared to land, hovered very low. And the next day, he had a Bigfoot encounter. It was right in the same spot. He had telepathic contact with it. I'm like, what? Telepathic Bigfoot? Are you kidding me? I had not looked into Bigfoot at that point. I was avoiding it because I was afraid that it might be real. And it was going to open up a can of worms. It was another subject I would have to look into, and I wasn't quite ready to do that because this is a lot. I can understand why people are skeptical, because UFOs involve telepathy and levitation and miraculous healing and all this stuff, a wide variety of paranormal events. And cryptozoology, really Bigfoot. So that was my first case, and I started getting others. I thought, oh, okay. And I started getting just simple Bigfoot cases, and certainly had enough simple UFO cases. And I can tell you hands down, the vast majority of people who encounter Bigfoot don't see a UFO. And the vast majority of people who are taken on board or have a landed UFO or see, there's no Bigfoot. It's just, but there's this residue of cases. And when I say residue, yeah, it's a small minority. I don't know what percentage I would use because there's so many Bigfoot cases and so many UFO cases, but I don't know, anywhere from 1% to 5%. And that means that's 100 cases easy in the literature, easily traceable. So I started looking into them because Pennsylvania alone, a huge UFO hotspot and a huge Bigfoot spot. Stan Gordon, a major researcher, had several cases. So I started collecting them. And yeah, there is a connection. I will say Bigfoot has been around for hundreds of years. We know this from Native American tradition. It's all over the world. There's different types of Bigfoot and Sasquatch and wild men and skunk apes. And I mean, each country has their own name for it. So that has been around for a very long time. I don't think that they're ETs, which is what people are like, is Bigfoot an alien? Well, I don't think so. Though there are cases where people have seen them coming out of UFOs, going into them, or in the presence of greys or Nordic beings, human-looking ETs. So I was collecting them all and trying to find a theory that fits, because if they're not ET, what's going on here? And this is just my theory. Take it for what you will. I think the ETs are contacting people on this planet. We know this, and we know that they're very interested in our wildlife. I mean, there's case after case of them picking flowers and taking soil samples and rabbits and all the animal life and so forth. So it makes perfect sense that they would be interested in. I mean, there's a few cases of people seeing dolphins having an association with UFOs. So I think what we're looking at is, Bigfoot are being contacted by ETs. And that I think Bigfoot is intelligent. If you look at the reports of this, I think that they probably are sentient, at least some of them. And I think it goes beyond that, because there's cases of what people would call paranormal abilities being demonstrated by these things, that they can turn invisible. I had my own case of that, by the way. Or disappearing in a flash of light, or all these sort of psychic abilities, telepathy. So that fits right along the line with the contactee phenomena. So I think some Bigfoot, in a word, are contactees. They're in contact with ETs.
Right, and that might help explain why they're so hard to find and elusive, like you're saying, is because they are highly intelligent and are gifted and in tune with nature on a level that we were, and then kind of as we grew more technological, we lost that ability.
Yeah, I think they can hear probably better than humans. They're largely nocturnal. Most of the reports are at night. So I think they can probably smell better than us. I don't know. We don't know. We have no baseline to say, who these guys are genetically and what abilities they have. But the number of reports, first-hand reports, I think do point towards them being intelligent and highly advanced in terms of how they've adapted to this planet or live among the wildlife, and psychically advanced.
Right. And so switching over to back to the UFOs, Neural Channels has a question for you of what are different types of marks on the body have you seen in the cases you've investigated?
I've seen occasional bruises. There are reports of scoop marks. Marks on the body aren't super common, at least in the research I've done. What I've seen more often is evidence of implants. And I hear this from many contactees where they will go to the dentist often or what have you and get an x-ray or an MRI. And the doctor's like, well, what's this? And there is no entry wound. There is no scar. There's no mark. So that I see quite a bit. I don't get a whole lot. Occasionally people will describe, I think Betty Hill, in her case, she talked about her dress being torn and there was this weird orange substance on her dress. Things like that do occasionally turn up. People will describe finger marks on their arm or something. And occasionally you will see incisions, or not so much incisions, but scars that have healed up. I mean, there are cases where people will come back and there's a little cut and it heals up in a day and it's gone. That sort of thing. I have seen quite a bit of that, or certainly read about it. I have a few personal cases. One lady I talked to, she had that happen. The ET said, well, we need to cut your arm here. she was fighting them the whole way. She was not happy. And they did it. And she showed me the little mark on her arm. And I'm like, well, that looks all healed up. She's like, I know. It healed up really fast. So that's one of the patterns we do see. If people do get a mark, it heals up at more than, I would say, 2 or 3 times the normal rate. I mean, overnight even.
Right. So you mentioned the implants, and I know there's no way to know 100% what they are, but I'm curious. And like we've said, in no way are you the expert on these, but what is your opinion of what the implants are and why they're in some people and not others?
Yeah, I suspect the vast majority of contactees, people who have been taken on board, do have them. I think sometimes they're very hard to detect. And there's been an enormous amount of speculation, just pure off-the-wall speculation. It's for tracking. It's for mind control. Very fear-based thinking. People, because we have technology where we implant animals, and we use it for tracking. That's what we do. But we also implant people with pacemakers. That's health-related, right? We have inoculations, again, health-related. So I started getting cases of this, certainly. And I remember the first one was that lady I mentioned who had a healing, and she was pulled on board and they were implanting her. And she says, what is that for? And they said, this is to measure the level of pollution in your body. And I thought that was interesting because I had gotten another case where someone also asked them, and they said, this is to boost your immune system. And I had another case where someone was told, this is to measure your vital signs so we know how your health is doing. So I started, over the years, getting more cases like this. And whenever anyone's gotten any firsthand information at all, it's health related. One lady asked them flat out, is this for tracking? And they said no. Each person gives off their own vibration, or what they used a certain word. It wasn't vibration, but something along the lines of an electromagnetic aura, sort of, that's unique to each person.
Right.
And they can locate them that way. I mean, one lady had her implant taken out by Dr. Roger Lear. I interviewed her, and she says the ETs came back right after her operation and put it back in. I had one lady who sneezed out her implant. She became deathly ill after that. And they came, took her, re-implanted her, and she got better. She was suffering from some weird hypoglycemic illness. Her sugar level was just going all over the map. She was fainting 2 or 3, 4 times a day, losing weight. She was getting really sick, and the doctors could not help her. So I think that is the purpose of implants. And when I say I think that's what the evidence is showing us. This is not speculation. This is what the cases show. So I'm trying to, speculation is all good and fun. I mean, it's sort of unavoidable. Like, what's going on here? We can only speculate sometimes. But I think it's important to, as much as possible, stick to the facts of what we know. And that's what the evidence is showing us, that implants are health related. There's a guy in England who was told this. He says, don't you dare remove my implant. I know what it's for. They told me. Dolly Saffron, I asked her about that. She says, oh yeah, most are health related. That's not the only thing. There are some that, she learned how to pilot the craft. They taught her how to do this. This is another reason why I don't think ETs are here to hurt us. They teach people all kinds of stuff. And she has an implant for that, as well as implants that monitor health. And again, It's far, far more common than people realize. And not all people under an X-ray.
I'll be honest, when I hear people say, oh, the implants are for tracking, I'm like, you realize these are people that have traversed light speed and traversed the galaxy. Do you really think when they get here, they need a device to tell us, oh, they're over in California now instead of Oregon? Well, we better take a right. Good thing we implanted them. It's like, come on, let's be a little, more thought provoking than that, because that just doesn't make sense. But we have an interesting question from Dinah Matthews, and I hope I pronounced your name right. It says, I've always heard they have a distinct smell. Do you believe this to be true?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah. I did some research into this because I had not heard of anyone sort of tracking these. Like, I always ask you, did you smell anything when you were on board a craft? And yeah, people do sometimes smell things. And often it's organic odors or perhaps odors of a metallic or chemical nature. So what we see is, in terms of a UFO being in the area and coming down and taking off, people will report ozone-like odors or an electrical smell, which I think points towards these craft being quite hot and, yeah, creating ozone, because we know ozone, from lightning strikes, will create ozone. So I think that's probably what people are smelling when they describe, like a sulfur smell or something like that. But people who are taken on board, this happened to Whitley Strieber, a very well-known contactee. He says they smelled a little bit like cinnamon, he said, or burnt cardboard in a weird way. And he had a couple of people who he interviewed who had encounters, and one lady said, oh, it was a woodsy kind of smell, the gray she saw. And the other one says, it smelled kind of woodsy. They used the same darn word, which I thought was fascinating because, yeah, I've heard people describing organic odors, cheesy smell or sort of a cinnamony smell. I think this is important because, like us, I think we're dealing with biological beings who do have body odor, who are biological beings, and people are describing biological odors on board craft. So that does turn up quite a bit. There's not a whole lot of reports of it because this is an area of research that hasn't gotten a whole lot of attention. I did put a chapter in this in one of my books, the Not From Here series, like what do UFOs smell like? Yeah, I think this is important because it speaks to these two things. One, we're dealing with advanced technology, and two, we're dealing with biological beings.
And, that's really interesting because it's something we don't think about. And I gotta say, it's kind of fun having Dolly Saffron in the chat group because she's also agreeing and answering some of your questions and collaborating and saying yes and helping answer questions in the chat group. And one of them was Neural Channel says, do implants have frequencies?
Well, Dr. Roger Lear removed implants, and he had a couple that had detectable electromagnetic transmissions coming out of them. They're magnetic. There's been cases where people try to remove them, and these darn things will move around in the body or disappear, or at least appear to disappear. So I think that there is something going on there. I don't know that there's been enough research where we can say for sure, at least not in the public arena, what's going on with in terms of frequencies. But yeah, I suspect they do transmit information in some way. Some of them, at least.
And I'm not sure what's going on in the chat group, but they're starting to talk about bad breath smell, and so I don't know that I would get close enough to an ET to be able to see if that smells or not, or if that would even be something I would sit there with the whole experience and go, I was in front of a UFO, but man, the thing I remember most is that alien had the worst breath.
Well, what's really interesting about smells is that is something that triggers memory. It's very much connected to the memory. It's one of the really powerful senses in a way. I mean, there's been a lot of research into that in terms of how the brain works. And Whitley Strieber talked about that because when he would smell that sort of cinnamony odor, he knew they were around and would bring them right back to that visceral feeling of being with them. So, yeah, I mean, talking to Dolly Saffron, she says, listen, they're human like us. They share the same genetics that we do. We all, which is what other contactees have told me, that we all have the same basic genetic heritage. They will usually give people who are awake to contact to any degree a message along the lines of, we are you are us, we are one. I've heard that exact phrase at least a dozen times. I've certainly read it more than that.
Right.
So, yeah, I remember mentioning that, and one lady I'd interviewed, she's like, oh my God, that's exactly what they told me. And I'm like, not surprised. I've heard it enough times where this is an important message that they're trying to relay. That's why I don't really like the word alien. It signifies something that's so different from us. And look at them. They're not that different from us. For Pete's sake, some look just like us. 100%.
Especially the Nordic.
Yeah, which is a term I don't like because it's not accurate. It implies Caucasian, and that's not true. I talked to a Native American guy, Stan Hughes. He had a UFO land right in front of him, and up stepped this guy. He said he looked Arab. He looked Middle Eastern. He said he was very handsome. Had, silver boots on, a blue jumpsuit, dark hair, shoulder length, dark eyes, dark skin. Talked to another guy. He says, they were all about 5 feet. They looked like twins. There was a number of them. They looked like brothers. They were very much alike. They had short brown hair and dark tan skin. They looked kind of Peruvian or Mexican, Mesoamerican. So I'm like, wow, that's interesting. Because you hear all different types of skin tones and eye shapes. Some people have normal sort of oval eyes. Some describe almond eyes that come to points, and some describe looking very Asian in appearance. Others, perfectly like just some Nordic, someone from Sweden or what have you. Norway, the Nordic countries.
I wonder if because everyone sees them so differently, yet they're the same, if they have a ability, like we would call it like a phasing ability, but more of they can make themselves naturally appear to a more comforting image to you. Like, I wonder, I guess in a way I'm saying is I wonder if they go in your mind and a little bit and see what is your version of a friendly alien and be like, okay, let's show ourselves that way. So people are more calm than going, oh my God, who are you?
Yeah, well, that absolutely does happen. That's called a screen memory. I think we have enough reports coming from all over the world from people who don't know each other, that are widely spaced by decades, who have not been exposed to the literature, to say that grays, as they are reported, look like the standard stereotypical gray, or a Nordic, or a praying mantis, or a tall white, or these little blue beings. That's what they look like. There's enough reports where it's very consistent. However, there are many cases of what we would call screen memories. This often happens with children, but certainly not limited to them, where people will have someone come into their bedroom and they describe seeing a teddy bear or a superhero or a cartoon character or a deer or an owl or a cowboy. I just talked to one guy, John Yost. He's had an encounter at age 7. He says, well, I went to the bathroom and standing in the hallway was Ultraman. I didn't know who Ultraman was, but that was a TV character from the 70s, I believe it was. A little sort of, not cartoon, but a sort of a Japanese superhero type
Right.
Character. And it didn't surprise me in the least because, yeah, they can do this. I think sometimes it's our own mind doing this. People will see something that does not fit their worldview and they will superimpose it and put something that that their own mind is comfortable with. Like, that must have been an owl. It has to be an owl. But sometimes I think the ETs will, dress up as clowns. I've got a bunch of cases involving clowns, or at least put that image forth. I don't think they're shapeshifters by any means, as some researchers
No,
put forth.
I think it's a mental image. So,
Yeah.
and they probably put that up to start with and then drop it, and you're okay. And so it's like, okay, here we are. This is us. Instead of having you be like, man, you look like that alien that tried to kill us. Let me get my gun. And it's like, no, that's not what we want.
Yeah, the first thing out of the ETs, the first thing they will communicate, almost without exception, is don't be afraid. Have no fear. Everything's fine. We're not here to hurt you. Everything's okay. You're gonna be fine. Do not be afraid. They've tried. We're so fear-based that they have a little bit of a hard time with it.
Right.
Because they're not here to hurt us. This is the whole purpose. This is what I found with my research, and I think it's borne out by other researchers who are objective. I'll underline that. Researchers who are not fear-based or in the government's pocket, because there's some, shame on them, disinformation artists out there who I don't trust at all. I think they're liars. But if you look at the research of people like Barbara Lamb, I would point to, or John Mack, he's no longer with us. There's some really good researchers out there. Edith Fiore, I don't know that she's still active, but these are people who I think objectively, without any agenda, put forth just the facts. And you'll see that the purpose of the onboard experience is manifold. There's multiple reasons. It's to heal. It's to basically to maintain our genetics. It's to guide people, to teach them. It's to wake them up to their own abilities, their own psychic abilities. It's to warn them about nuclear proliferation and pollution and our warlike ways and the dangers of greed and corruption, and the destruction of the environment. So this is very consistent. It is the most common message. As I said, this follows a pretty set pattern. And it didn't come from me. I basically confirmed what Thomas Bullard found out years before I even entered the field. This is what he said happens. I'm like, yeah, you're right. He's another good researcher. So we have to be very careful and not look through the lens of fear or look to our government for answers on this subject, because they're not telling us the truth. No. If you want to know what's going on with the UFO phenomena, look to the contactees, not channelers or people who aren't doing their research or just wildly speculating. We really have to, if you really want to know the truth, you got to have personal experience. That's really the only pathway to true knowledge. And you can communicate telepathically with ETs. So that's where I think the true heart of the UFO phenomena is. It's all about healing. It's about teaching and guiding and waking people up and warning them.
Right. And we've been talking a lot about frequency and everything, and neural channels asked, are we talking about EMF? What frequency? Radio frequency? Which I think is a good thing to bring up is, yeah, we talk about frequencies, but which frequency are we referring to?
Well, in terms of the implants, like I mentioned, Dr. Lear, they were able to measure some things with an EMF meter. And there's been some research on implants where an EMF meter will go off in the presence of an implant. This is an area that is just starving for research. And I can't say that I'm an expert on that, so I really can't speak to it with any authority. So I wish I could. I do know that the implant phenomena is real, and we already talked quite a bit about it, but as far as what exact frequencies they're emitting, I couldn't tell you. I know our brain actually emits frequencies. We have AI here on this planet, artificial intelligence, that has gotten to the point where it can detect and to a certain degree translate the readings that are coming out of our brain in terms of delta and theta and alpha and so forth, but much beyond just reading simple frequencies.
Right. Well, we got like 2 minutes left, and I know there's more questions in the chat group, and I'm sorry to everyone in the chat group that if we didn't get to your questions, I apologize. We just only have so much time. And I want to give people a chance to know where to find you. If they have questions about, experiences, or maybe they feel they might have had an experience with being a contactee, where can they reach you to talk to you about it?
I'm on Facebook, pretty easy to find. Instagram, Twitter. I have a YouTube channel. I have a website. Just punch my name in. It should take you there. The actual address is prestondennett.weebly.com. So yeah, if you have a story you want to share or a question or a comment, I always love hearing from people who are interested in this subject in any way. And my books are on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and other online retailers. So yeah, I'm pretty easy to reach, and I try to be responsive. I do get a lot of queries and inquiries, so please be patient. But yeah, I will usually get back to you.
All right. Well, we appreciate you coming on, and this was truly, I would say, enlightening one of our episodes, because wow, I was blown away with some of the information you brought forth, and I was like, wow, this is stuff you don't hear about. And so I'm so glad that you were able to come on and share this with us.
Thanks, Michael. I appreciate you having me on. It's an important subject, so I'm glad you're doing your show. It's important that people know about this stuff. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I know you said you had an hour, only a half hour extra, and we're at that point. So we will say goodbye to you. And thank you again for coming on and sharing this. And I hope if you ever feel you want to, you're welcome to come back on anytime if you want to share more. And don't stop writing the books, the articles, the searching, because wow, I love how you put it together.
Oh, thanks very much. Yeah, and if you want, I can contact Dolly Saffron and see if she would come on your show, because she can talk with actual authority about a lot of the stuff that I'm just a researcher. She's experienced it. So I know she's there in chat. So yeah, I can definitely set that up if you want.
We would love that.
Awesome.
So thank you again, and hope you have a wonderful evening and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thanks very much. You too.
Okay. And so for everyone else, we are going to be ending our show now. Thank you all for coming into the chat group, and stay tuned next week as we will have our friend Tammy Love on, and hopefully Carla will be able to come back, and the storms, we won't have any weather that night. So to all you in the paranormal out there, if you're going to go investigating this weekend, have fun, be safe, and have a great night.